Hey kids, we are going to create a 3D scene using Cinema 4D. It's a new piece of software that comes packaged with After Effects. It's Cinema 4D Lite, so you don't get all the cool bells and whistles, but we can make all sorts of cool stuff with it, and hopefully this is a good intro into the world of 3D. Now you're going to have to start with After Effects, and you'll open Cinema 4D with that program. So it's kind of a gateway. So you'll always work from After Effects and open Cinema 4D with it. All right, so I have After Effects open, and I've created a new composition already. You should know how to do that. I've just called it Cinema 4D Training, or C4D Training. The way that Cinema 4D works with After Effects is that you create a new layer. So I'm going to come down to my layer area here and create a new Maxon Cinema 4D file. And it's just like a null object or a shape layer or a solid. You're going to create a new layer, but then it wants you to save this file as something else. So I'm going to just call this Cinema 4D Training. I'm on a Mac right now, so it might look a little different than your computer. So I'm just going to save my things to my desktop just for ease of use. And it's going to say, hey, I already have this file because I've already been trying this out. Replace it, so that's fine. What it's going to do is it's going to do a couple of things for you. It's going to create a new layer. Okay, it's about a 3-second layer. It's also going to pop open, and I have my effects over here. You might have yours on the left, and it's an effect. So there's some stuff here, and then your screen looks kind of like a 3D, super old school 8-bit plane. Also, Cinema 4D has started to open if it hasn't opened already. Now, you didn't see it on my screen because I have two windows. I'm going to bring it over here. This is Cinema 4D. It's pretty simple, but the program itself is very complex. And we're going to go over some of the interfaces and what the tools are, where everything's located first. Okay. On the left-hand side, all right, let's start with the menu. So the menu up top here, just like every other program, you got a menu. So if I say, hey, open the render menu or something like that, or edit menu, it's going to be up top here. Right below it, there's a strip of tools. There's several different sections of these tools. You'll have manipulation, so you'll have objects that you'll manipulate in 3D space. I don't typically use this stuff here, but these are render options, so like how to create your image. And then these tools right here are more towards the creation of the geometry. You have cameras and lights as well. Right smack dab in the middle, you got your composition. That's where we're going to create our work or your canvas. Left-hand side, there are some other buttons, and these do various things, but typically they have to do with modeling. And we'll get into what that is. Right-hand side, there's a big block in the upper right-hand corner. That is basically your layer palette, where all of your objects are stacked, and there's nothing there right now. Below that are particular settings about those objects or about your scene. We have settings about our scene right now because there's nothing there. And then we have a timeline, very, very small timeline. You have your numbers, and you have a play button. And then below that, there's this empty spot, and that's for materials. So there's a lot packed in here, and we don't really see a whole lot yet, but it will start to build. Okay. The first thing we're going to do is talk about 3D. 3D is another dimension on top of After Effects. Is 2 dimensions. Typically, we've been dealing with X and Y coordinates. X is the horizontal, Y is the vertical. Now we have a third dimension, or Z, in it's the depth of the scene. If you look at your screen, you have some color coordinated sort of arrows. I see a green one, I see a blue one, and a red one. The red one is X, and I know that because in the lower left-hand corner of the screen, I see a little kind of key. All right, X is the red, Y is green, so that's vertical, and then Z is the depth. So I can kind of orient myself there. So we have to start thinking in 3 dimensions. Everything's in 3 dimensions now. Now we need to figure out how do we get around this program. There's a couple of different ways to do that. I like keyboard shortcuts, but you may not. If you don't like keyboard shortcuts, there's 4 little buttons up here that will do everything for you. So let's take a look at those. The first one is pan. I can click and drag on this button here and it will pan up, down, left, right. So that's a way to pan. I prefer holding the 1 key and clicking and dragging. I like keyboard shortcuts. So either way. The second button is zoom. So you can click and drag to the left or the right and it will zoom in and out. I prefer the scroll wheel. Another way to do it. Then there's rotate or orbit. So you can rotate or orbit with this button, clicking and dragging kind of in a circle. Or I prefer holding the Option or Alt key and then clicking and dragging, a little more control, but I prefer that. So navigating is pretty easy, but this will take you a little bit of time to remember. Oh, yeah, that's orbit, that's pan, so practice. Next, there's one view that we're looking at right now. This is called the perspective view, and if you don't see that label, let me know. This is perspective. Now, we can see all 3 dimensions in this view, but it can be a little tricky to design with just this one view. So we'll need to see the top view, the side view, the front view, and there's a way to get in and out of those views very easily. This 4th button right here, if you click that, it'll take you into your 4-up view. Perspective, top, right, front. You can also see other views. Another way to do that without that button, keyboard shortcuts, or actually a mouse shortcut, is scroll wheel click. Your scroll wheel has a click to it. So I can get in and out of a view by clicking that view, and it takes me into that view. So we'll use that as we go. Using your 4-up view is a very, very efficient way of designing. If you're only using your perspective view, it's actually very, very difficult to get exactly what you want. So let's go ahead and start building some 3-dimensional geometry. And we call it geometry because it has width, height, and depth. I'd like you to take a look at the cube that you see here. Now this has many things underneath it. If you see there's a little tiny black arrow in the lower right hand corner, that means there's more to it. If I click this and hold it, there are other objects that we can add. It's very easy to add an object. If I just click this, it's going to add a cube. So go ahead and just click one time. Lots of stuff has happened. First of all, we have a cube. Second, in our object manager, we have a layer, or it's called cube, and there's some other stuff there. Also, this part of the screen has populated here. It says size and segments, and there's some tabs. Let's go through what all this means. And also on your screen, there's some arrows and some manipulation that we can do here. First of all, you're seeing ways to move your object if you have your move tool. So the move tool is right here. So go ahead and select that. Or you can press E on your keyboard. It's a good shortcut to get down. You can move this in 3 dimensions. You can move it vertically. So if you grab the screen arrow and move it up, you can move it in the Z direction, that's the blue one, or the X direction, that's the red one. You can also orbit around this thing, or pan, or zoom into it, so you can kind of see this in any direction that you want to. There are also these corner widgets that move them in 2 directions. So if I wanted to move this in the Y and Z direction, I would do that. I don't ever really use that in this view. You can also click your 4-up view and move the object in those views as well. That's typically what I do. So you can grab, if you have your move tool, you can grab this really anywhere. You don't have to grab it on the arrow and move it however you want to. So in any of these views, you can move, you can rotate, you can scale. We'll get to that in a bit. Cube, right here. This is your object manager. It's a list of your objects. It's just going to give it a name. It's not very fancy, but you can rename things. So let's call this box, just so you can kind of get a feel for how to rename stuff. There's other things here. This has to do with visibility and materials, which we'll get into. You can select or deselect things. You can cut and paste. You can delete things from here. It's a pretty easy way to manage your objects, but it can get very filled up, and if you don't name things, it becomes difficult. Down here you have your project or your object properties. That's what I want to say, or attributes. You have a box here or a cube, and you can see that it's got a size, predetermined size, and it's measured in centimeters right now. It's 200 by 200 by 200. And you can change these sizes here if you like. That's one way to scale. Also, this box has particular properties. A box has segments right here. We're in the Object tab, so if you click around, you can see, all right, there's all sorts of stuff here. You can also move things based on coordinates, X, Y, and Z. You can scale them here, and you can rotate them here. So there's several things. What I really want to focus on is this particular object's properties. So segments are an important part of a cube, and every shape has different properties. So let's try to modify some properties of this box. So you have to have it selected. You got to go to the Object tab, and then we're going to enter some segments, meaning we're going to chop this box up into some parts. So why don't you go ahead and enter 3 for each of these. So segments 3 by 3 by 3. You can hit Tab or Enter, and I don't really see a whole lot happening with my box. Okay, it's not really changing a whole lot. It actually didn't do anything. The reason is because we're not seeing this with lines or with the edges that we need to. Right now, this is a particular view. In every viewport, that's what this is called, a viewport, you'll have particular qualities that you're going to show. In this viewport, I'm displaying as shading. I want to view as lines. So when you click that, boom, there you go, you have segments. You can also add segments to other objects, but why would you want to add segments to something? Like, what's the point of this? When we get into modeling, it can help you have a little more options as far as like creating a unique piece of geometry. I would like to show you what the purpose of this is with another shape. So I'm going to hold down my cube and select a sphere. And what it does is it places the object right in the middle of your screen. So we'll need to move it over here a bit. And if I kind of rotate and take a look at it, I have the move tool and I'm kind of moving this so I can see it. Right now we have a sphere that is that looks pretty round, and it puts a sphere over here in my object manager. I also have that object tab down here that gives me different options than the cube or the box. So if I wanted to call this like globe or something like that, the object tab here has 2 different choices. We have radius, which is basically how big this thing is going to be. So if I wanted it to be bigger, I could type in 200. Maybe we make that 150. And also the segments. That is the same thing as the cube, but you're really going to see it matter in this globe. So if I reduce this down to 12, take a look at the sphere. It starts to look really blocky. There are less polygons in this sphere. If I crank this up to, let's say, 50, there are more polygons, making it a smoother globe. So the more polygons you have, the smoother things can turn out to be. It also makes your computer run a little slower, so there's a give and take between the two. Let's figure out how to move these things, how to move, scale, and then rotate them. So we know how to pan, we know how to orbit, we know how to zoom. Those are 3 navigation functions, but what can we do with the actual objects themselves? So if you click on one, you can select them by using the selection tool. There's a couple of selection tools. The live select tool is basically whatever you click on or drag over, it's going to select. So I'm just going to click my cube. There are 3 tools right here. There's the move, there's the scale, and there's the rotate tool. So the move tool, or shortcut E, which I would get down, you can move in any direction that you want to. If you go to your 4-up view, you can also move your cube there. So that's a common way to move things. Rotate, or R, you'll get this different sort of widget. And so you can rotate with these bands. If you click anywhere, it's going to be kind of this freewheeling sort of rotation. So beware of that. You can go into your 4-up view and rotate there as well. One thing people do is hold the shift button down once you start clicking, and it will constrain your rotation to 10 degrees at a time. So if I wanted to rotate it 90 degrees, that's a pretty easy way to do it. You can also scale things. So T is the scale button, and you can scale with these guys here. So I'm gonna just click and drag this. You can also click and drag anywhere inside of it. If I hold Shift down after I press or click and drag, it will constrain it to percentages, 10%. So some ways to scale, rotate, and move. There's another little tiny widget here. There's little buttons there. So let's say I have my move tool. I can also scale it from here in its individual directions, X, Y, and Z. So that's another way to scale objects if you see some of these little buttons here. So in my sphere, I have one little button, and that controls the radius. So some of these objects have those abilities. So those are easy ways to navigate. I can also go in my object manager and I can parent things pretty easily. Here's one way to parent it. Click and drag the box into the globe. And now the globe is the parent. And so if I move the globe, now I have a parent. I can click and drag this out of there, and now it's not a parent. So really easy way to do some quick parenting and moving and rotating if you want to do that. All right, so we don't need these objects. We can delete them. You can select them individually, or you can click and drag a selection up here in your object manager and just hit delete. We're going to create some presets. This little clapper with the gear, edit render settings. So you click that guy, and we're going to make a couple of changes. The output, make sure that our frame is the right size, 1920 by 1080. Also, we want to render the all frames. Next, we're going to add an effect. Ambient occlusion is what we want to add. That will help our render look a little more real. It's how light bounces around in your scene. And we want to create a preset. Right-click on the My Render Settings, Save Preset, and just name this. I'm just going to call this Jared's. And then hit OK. And it's going to save that as a preset. It's not loaded yet, so you also need to load the preset. So you're going to right-click and then load, and you're going to find your own setting. Okay. You also need to make sure this little white box is checked or selected right there. So setting a preset, now we're ready to go when we start rendering. Another thing that we're going to bounce in and out of is if you go to this render to picture viewer, and this right here, interactive render region, is going to be a realistic view of what will be rendered. It's not, if we had this off, Alt-R, you can toggle that on and off, it wouldn't render this grid. It's going to actually render what's going to be in this box. So this is a more realistic view of what the lights are going to look like, and how the reflections will look, and all that sort of stuff. So this is the real view inside of here. This is more of the building view. So toggling that on and off is pretty critical to get an actual view of what you're making. Okay, we are going to create a little scene now using some primitives and modifying the object and making sure that we're keeping our object manager clean. And I'm going to show you some other techniques of how to keep things organized. But we're going to build a scene now. All right, so let's start with a primitive, the cube. We're going to create a little foundation. Okay, you can use the object tag right here, and let's make this 1000 by, let's see, the Y direction, we should make that about 20 and 1000. So it's going to be a nice big plane like that. All right. Don't need a bunch of segments in here, so that looks pretty good. It doesn't have to be exactly like mine, but this is going to be kind of the base of where everything's going to sit. Right here, we need to be able to see our name. We're going to call this ground. Or let's go foundation. Okay, and you can click and drag that out there so if you're not seeing it. Foundation. All right, so keep your layers named. If it just is called cube 1, cube 2, cube 3, it's very, very difficult to keep track of. Naming things is a critical part of this creation process. So that's our foundation. Okay, and it places this object right in the smack center of our screen. So if you go into your 4-up view and you kind of set up this, the axis or the origin is going to be right in the middle of our screen. You can see there's some darker lines that kind of happen there, and it's right in the middle. Okay, we're going to add another cube. Just click cube again. It's going to add a cube. You can see there's some intersecting geometry, so it's right in the middle. It puts it above and below. So we're just going to drag this guy up a bit. Don't worry about it yet as far as where it's going to be placed, but I want to make it wider. I'm going to use the little widget this time, and then I'm going to pull this guy out kind of like that. So if you want specific measurements, let's go 320 and let's go 900. So those are my measurements there. And it doesn't have to be perfect, but what I do want to have this is it not in the center, in the X direction. I want it to be kind of pulled over to the right a bit. So I would like there to be more space here than there is over here. Okay, maybe it can be taller. I definitely don't want it to pop out of the bottom like that. So one way you can handle that is popping into your 4-up view and taking a look and going, oh, okay, the box is actually extending below the foundation. You don't need to have it line up perfectly. It can intersect, that's okay, as long as it doesn't stick below. So you can see right here, it's sticking below. So your 4-up view is a really, really critical tool in figuring this thing out. What I did right there, and I do it all the time, is I rotated my front view. And I hate that. I'm like, oh man, now it's all rotated. Anytime, you can fix that by going to View, Frame Default on any of these windows, and it resets it. Okay, let's keep naming these things. We're going to call this counter. All right, my counter needs a little bit of base molding, so I'm going to just copy and paste this counter. Control C, Control V, and I'm going to call this base molding. I'd like this to be shorter. Maybe this is going to be 25. I usually kind of drag it and then I enter a more precise measurement there. I'm going to drag it down, and right now it's the same exact size as my counter. I don't want it to be the same exact size, so I'm going to go into my top view and drag this out a touch and drag this up a touch. Not going to worry about the measurements over here, but all right, this should come out just a bit and not too much. So it's kind of like the molding around your kitchen counter. Okay, so I want to see what this looks like already. I'm already interested in what this looks like. So if you press Option or Alt R, it's going to give you a render window, this interactive render window, and you can drag this window anywhere you want. You can make it smaller or bigger, but it's going to give you an accurate view of, okay, how are the shadows going to kind of work right now? Also, there's this little tiny triangle right here. You can drag this way up, and that's going to be full quality, or you can drag it down to be horrible quality. You can see there's a very big difference. But if you drag it all the way up, it's going to take a little longer, but that's a little more of an accurate view. So, looking good so far. We already got some shadowy sort of goodness happening there. All right, saving my work often to make sure that I don't lose anything. Base molding, here's another way to copy things. Press and hold Control or Command, and your mouse will turn into a little kind of, looks like two little white boxes. If you see that, you're going to make a copy if you drag it. So that's another way to copy things, and it'll create a copy. I'm going to call this countertop. All right, this countertop needs to be bigger than the base molding. And I'd like it to not be centered, but I want to drag it over here a little bit. So there's a little bit more of an overhang on this end of it than on this end of it. So it's not completely centered. You can also make it wider if you want. Countertop should be a little bit bigger. Okay. I also want to focus on a different part of this. Everything's got these 90-degree angles, and that's not ideal because nothing has 90-degree angles, like nothing. even precise engineering doesn't have a 90-degree angle. Everything has a little bit of an edge to it. So what we can do is add a fillet to it. On my countertop, it's a cube, and one of the object parameters is fillet. And you'll see that it'll add some rounding to it. There's also a little widget here that if you ever see that, it's nice to be able to manipulate it with this widget. It's very easy. Or you could type the numbers in. Let's go with a fillet radius of 3. And the subdivisions means how many times does it kind of go over the edge. The more you have, the more round it's going to be, just like any of the like cubes segments. Same sort of idea. So you add a fillet that you are liking. I'm thinking this is kind of a marble countertop or something like that. Okay. The next thing I'm going to need are a couple of stools. And I'm going to use some different objects here. If I go into my primitives, I probably could use a cylinder for this. So you'll have to figure out, like, what can I use for what I'm building? Cylinder probably would do the trick. So I'm going to put my cylinder over here, and we're going to make a little I guess, stool. Okay, there's the widgets here where you can control the radius and how tall this is. So maybe the radius is 55 and the height is 18. You can also control how many segments are in the rotation if you need to, or height segments if you need to. Not really necessary in this case, but we do want to add a cap or a fillet cap. It's too square for me. So that's this particular object, a cylinder, which I'm going to name stool top or top. This has caps. And that's the top and bottom part of this cylinder. So if I click fillet, it's the same thing. So I'm going to keep this consistent. I'm going to use a 3 and then a 5. Okay. Do that however you like. That looks like a stool top to me. We could, pull. Oops, don't want to do that. I want to pull this guy out a little wider. So maybe we make him, 70. Looks like a stool top. Go into my 4-up view, and it looks like that could be about right there, or so. Okay, now I need to make sure that this is up high enough. Maybe there. Okay. Now let's make the stool kind of pull. It's a cylinder, so I could also copy and paste this. Control C, Control V, and I'm going to call this stool pull. It's just going to be dragged down. I'm going to go into my front view, and I don't want it to have a radius, so I'm just going to use a little widget here. Or you could control it in the caps. You could just undo fillet if you want to. Make this radius smaller, and obviously we want to make this taller. So kind of have to get it there. I want it to kind of go into my floor. I want it to go into my stool. Let me kind of take a look over here. Looks pretty good. You can also toggle off the lines and take a look and say, all right, that's looking okay. Looks pretty good to me. I'd like to show you how to group things. I showed you how to parent things with one object going to the other. That's one way of parenting. Another way is adding a null object, similar to After Effects. Inside your primitives, there's null objects, so I'm going to add a null object, and I'm going to call this stool. I'm going to drag stool pull to where my arrow is pointing down, and I'm going to drag stool top also into the null object. And now I have a null object. You can see it right there. And inside are the children of that null object. What bothers me is that it puts the origin not in the center of that object. So let's see if we can fix that. I've seen my computer crash one way, so I'm going to actually do it another way. So you go into Mesh, Axis Center, and then this very top menu. And then what I like to do is click Include Children, Use All Objects, and then Execute. And then it'll put that little axis right in the middle. So if you need to center an axis point, if you need to rotate things, it's just like an anchor point in After Effects. So it's nice to have a centered axis in Cinema 4D. All right, I need 2 stools. This counter would be very lonely if I only had 1 stool, so I'm going to, here's another way to copy things. Hold Command or Control, click and drag down, and now I have 2 stools. So I'm just going to call this, I'm going to call this right stool, and I'm going to call this left stool. All right, the right one, let's see, just going to drag this one over about there-ish. Maybe this one gets drug up a little bit. So now we have this sort of bar stool counter area looking pretty good. You can toggle that render region and take a look so far. Looking kind of cool. All right. The next object we're going to use is a sphere. So I'm going to pull a sphere up and it's going to plop it right in the middle of my screen. I also want to see lines, so I'm going to change my display option to show lines. That's always nice in this case. I'm going to turn this into a bowl. So right now a sphere isn't really working for me. I need half a sphere. So under Object, Type, change it from Standard to Hemisphere. And that's going to change it to half of a sphere that's hollow. I'm going to call this bowl. I need to rotate it. So I can get my rotation tool, click on whatever view you're in. I'm in the perspective view. Click and drag and hold Shift down. I want to rotate it 180 degrees. Alrighty. Pressing E. Gonna move this guy over the table. Also going to make sure that it's not intersecting with my table too much. Maybe a little bit is okay. And how big is this bowl? Pressing T. Let's drag this down a bit. Might need to reposition this guy. So relative size to the stool, depending on how big of a bowl that you're going to have. I also don't like how spherical it is. I actually want this to be a little wider than it is tall. So I'm going to press T, come to my right view, and actually I need to change it. If I click on bowl, if I spell that right, and I go to coordinates, and I'm going to reduce it in the Y direction, you can see that it's becoming more of a bowl. So let's say 0.7. And then maybe 0.75. Here we go. Tool. Now there we go. It's looking pretty good. Okay, so there's our bowl. Saving often. I want to fill it with milk. I'm going to use another object called a disk. All right, this disk, if I look at my top view, is bigger than my bowl. Bring it up. You can see that it's pretty big. I'm going to use this little widget here and just kind of pull that inward. Get a little more accurate. I need my disk to be right in the center of my bowl. And pull that in. So it's not intersecting with the bowl, it's just kind of inside. It doesn't have to be perfect. And it is based on where in the bowl that you put it. So you're just going to have to make sure that it's not coming outside of the bowl. Alrighty, so we have milk. And now we need some like Cocoa Puffs or something inside of there. I'm going to call this milk. And then Cocoa Puffs, let's do a sphere. And obviously that is massive, so I need to size that way down. That looks pretty weird. So, I don't know. Get it to a place where you like it. Let's call that good. Oh, okay. So we have a sphere. I'm gonna call this Cocoa Puff, CCP. I want to duplicate this a lot. So I'm gonna hold Command or Control and click and drag this guy over here and maybe reposition it. Click and drag, click and drag, click and drag. Maybe make 6 or so. Right? You can move these up and down, create some variety if you want to. That's always nice. Not everything is the same. Okay. We have 6 of them. Now I could duplicate this all over the place, or I could just group these. Here's another way to group. Right-click, group objects. So if you selected all of your objects, you can group them, and it puts it in a null object for you. So I'm going to call this CCP1. Now this null object is the group of them. So I can duplicate that. Hold Control down, duplicate. What I don't want to do is make sure that these are not running into the side of my bowl. All right, duplicate, duplicate, and they can overlap, it's fine. Duplicate, you can rotate it if you want to. Just make sure you're on the green on this view, so you get some variety. Duplicate maybe one more time. So, you know, whatever you want to. And if you click on an individual one, you can move them around still, so to create a little bit of variety. So that's pretty easy to generate a lot of objects pretty easily. I'm going to group this group of groups. Another way to do it is Alt or Option G with the layers you have selected. We'll also put them in a null. So I'm going to call this Cocoa Puffs and then group. So now this is treated as an entire group. So you can see grouping things and nulls and stuff like that are really important. And you can always drill down into your layers. So that's a really, really crucial skill to make sure you're grouping things and naming things and keeping them together. I also want to group my bowl, my milk, and my cereal. So I'm just going to select all those, Option or Alt G, and we'll just call this cereal. All right, so now I have an entire bowl of cereal. What I like to start doing now is taking a look at the shadows. Alt R, and take a look at that. There's some shadowing underneath. There's some shadowing on all the spheres. It's starting to actually look kind of sort of real with some real shading. So that's pretty cool. I want 2 bowls of cereal, so here's an easy way to do that. Hold Control and click and drag your second bowl of cereal in front of the second stool. If you want to, you know, maybe this one's a little more forward. This one's forward. You know, maybe you can rotate them, just kind of randomize them so they're not identical. But yeah, there we go. Okay. Next, we need maybe some hanging lights that come down and shine on the counter. So this is going to start getting into some modeling. So we've been building things with primitives, spheres, cubes, cylinders. Now we're going to use a different shape and we're going to start modeling it, kind of breaking it apart and looking at the pieces. So we're going to use a capsule. So it's of course it's going to have different properties over here. But let's go ahead and move this guy out of the way. I really like how the capsule looks. But I don't want to have the whole capsule. I want to have half of it. So anytime you're going to plan on modeling, you should try to get this thing as close as you think it should be, and then you should break it into an editable object because you can't go back. So let's turn the height segments down to 1. You don't need a bunch of heights, actually 2. We want one line right in the middle. Okay, so we're going to break this object right at that line. So height segments of 2. Okay, this button here turns this object from the object that it is, the capsule, into an editable object that can be treated much differently. So you'll lose all of the attributes of the object, but you'll be able to pull it apart. So go ahead and make it editable. You'll notice that the object tab goes away. The capsule kind of looks a little different over here in your layers, but the object looks basically the same. We're going to access some of these tools now. I want you to try to click on a few of these. Click on the points tool and you'll see every point is accessible now, meaning it's editable. The edges is an interesting way to edit an object, so you can select and move and manipulate all of the edges. Or polygons are the faces. Okay, every face can be manipulated. Once you go to the points, and we're also going to focus on how to select things. So we have a live selection tool, which is an arrow with a circle, and we also have this one right here, rectangular selection. So I want you to choose that one. And this is just done by clicking and dragging, just like most programs. There's a very important setting that we're gonna have here. Over here, it says in your options, it says only select visible elements. Basically, that means if I click and select, it's going to only select what I can see, but on the back side of it, I can't see it, so it's not going to select that. If I click that and I go to my 4-up view, I want you to see what happens here. If I go into another view here, and let's say in my perspective view, I click and drag around the points that I think I'm going to have. You can see, actually, in my front view, it displays it pretty well. I'm actually not selecting all the points through the object. If I uncheck that and do the same exact thing, it's going to select every point through the third dimension there. And that's what I actually want to do. So make sure that's not checked, but it is a nice option to toggle off and on. You hit delete, and now you have a capsule that has an opening. That's looking good. Let's do a little modeling with the points here. I want you to click and surround all of the points on the edge there. And you can do all sorts of things with this, but I'm going to do something simple. Press T for transform. And let's go to the top view here. And we're going to pull those points out a bit. So you can see if I pull those points out, it's creating a bit of a flare. So get that to the point where you want it, and I'm going to call this Lite. This button here goes back into the model mode, kind of similar to where we were before. There's this amber outline around the whole thing. All right, so we got a Lite. It's probably pretty massive, so let's go ahead and position this thing where we think it should go. It's really big, so I'm going to bring this down maybe, I don't know, 50%. That's looking better. Lights are not that big. Position this. It's probably going to be over the center of the counter, but it's also going to be higher. So it's going to be up a bit. Not too high because we need to frame the shot, but maybe something like that. Okay. We also need a little pole or cable, I guess, that comes down from that. We could just build that with a cylinder. So I'm going to position my cylinder, again, 4-up view, really critical to work in this view if you can. And the cylinder is not going to be real wide, or the radius is going to be small. And let's see. I want it to kind of intersect with the geometry right there. We're not going to see that, but I don't want there to be a space there. So maybe turn off my lines. Something like that. It doesn't have to be completed. There doesn't have to be a top to it. It's just going to be a place where we can put lights, and we can kind of see this hanging down. All right, so we're going to call this maybe, I don't know, pole. I'm going to group these two things, Alt-G, and I'm going to call this light, or left light, because I'm going to have two. And hopefully you've learned by now an easy way to make a duplicate is to hold Command or Control and click and drag like nya. And we have right light. Just like that, we got 2 lights. All right. Next, we're going to make a cereal box. Cereal box can be a cube, but we also need to model that because I want the flaps to open up a bit. So start with a cube. Let's throw that on the tabletop here, on the countertop. And I want it to be, you know, less of a cube and more of a, you know, rectangular prism. I believe that's the right term. So it's going to be that. Maybe not so tall. It's going to intersect with the tabletop. So you get that where you want it to be. And I'm going to open it up first, and then I'm going to rotate this thing around. I've kind of learned that. Like, all right, let's build this thing first, get it to the way you look, and then rotate it in your scene. Okay, so let's call this box. We got a box. All right, I know that the flaps are going to open like that. So, you know, there's a couple ways you can go about this. I've seen my program kind of crash on one method, so I'm going to try another method. First, I want to open this top so you can see through it, and then I'm going to use a plane to create some flaps. So, you know, probably 10 ways to go about this. First, I'm going to turn it into an editable object once I get the size correct. I don't need to add segments, not necessary. Editable object. Next, I'm going to use the polygon tool, and I'm going to click and select this top polygon and just hit delete. Now that box is open. You can kind of take a look inside of it. Okay. All right. New object. I want a plane. A plane is just a flat surface. And this plane, if I go into display lines, it's got like tons of polygons to it. I don't need any polygons. I don't need any segments. I just need 1 by 1. So it's just a plane. I do need to make this quite a bit smaller. Okay. So maybe I go into my top view. Okay, I want this as wide as my box. Try to get that close. I'm sure I could do this mathematically, but we're going to do that. Okay, so I have a plane here, and I also want it to be kind of flush with the top of the box. Let's see. I need my plane to be, let's say, less wide. Here's another way that I like to manipulate geometry. So you click on plane, you go to object, and then you can type in a number here, or you can click and drag these numbers up and down. So let's say, I don't know, 55. All right, so we're going to position this so it's touching the edge. I also maybe want it to open up a little bit, so I'm going to use my rotation tool and just kind of rotate that up right there. You know, I'll need to pull this up. Here's one thing that's really helpful, and I'm going to use this right now. These coordinates, once you rotate something, the coordinates in the plane gets really messed up for this object. So if I pull it up like this, it's actually not going straight up. I want this to go straight up and down vertically, but the object itself is rotated, so the coordinates are messed up. This button right here, W, is going to use the coordinate system of the world to move this object. So sometimes it's really helpful to click this on, and you can see, oh, I can just move this straight up now and straight over if I need to. Super duper helpful. You know, get in there, zoom in, see if you can kind of get that right there. Bam. Okay. I need a second flap, so I'm going to call this flap 1. Copy and paste that, Control C, Control V. Maybe I move that over. I'm going to turn off my coordinate system. Rotate this. Doesn't need to be the same rotation. turn this on. Maybe move this up and over. Use the same kind of method. And maybe my flaps are huge, but whatever. You can put other flaps on there if you want to, but I just want to exaggerate that for now. But it looks all right. So we got a cereal box, flap 1, flap 2. I'm going to group all those and call it cereal box. Awesome. Now I'm going to rotate this box so it's not just completely square. You know, it's just face in front. It's not very interesting. So I'm actually going to rotate my box, turning off my global. So it's got a little bit of visual interest. Maybe it's, you know, not completely centered on the table. Maybe it's more left. I don't know, something like that. Looks pretty good. Okay, last piece of geometry that we need is a title. We need some words in here. We are going to put the words right in this center spot right here, and we can do that very easily. A couple of different methods. We need something called a spline, and we've been using primitives. You know, this menu, but we're going to go into this menu here. This is a way to draw things custom or create shapes from basic things like squares and circles, and you can also use text. So it's just another way of making geometry. So these first two buttons are making geometry, making shapes, making primitives. That's where you kind of start. So go ahead and hold this down. You'll see lots of different options, but we're looking for the text, which is here. All right, it's going to throw a text object in your scene, and it's going to say text, and it's probably going to be all messed up and all that, but we will change it. All right, so just like everything else, you got options and, for your object. So it says text. I want you to type in my favorite place. And once you click on your scene, it should take. All right. Also, pick a font that you like. We have, you know, we don't have every font. You guys don't have all the fonts that I have, so pick something that you like. I like let's see, Myriad Pro, or let's say Arial Black. Okay. My favorite place. Something that's easy to read. Don't make it difficult to read. Rotation's messed up, so we need to rotate it. We need to rotate it a couple of ways. But let's not worry about that yet. We want to make geometry of this. Right now, you can't even see it if you rendered this. If I go Option R, I can't even see my text because there's no physical geometry to my text. It's just it's a spline. There's no thickness to it. So I need to add some thickness, or what's called extruding. Okay, so this is a bit odd, but this is how you do it. So you go to your subdivision surfaces, this little green box with a bounding box, and inside of there, there's an extrude object. This is a modifier, so this modifies things. There's two modifier areas here. There's this area, and there's also this one here, which I probably won't go into, but it's pretty fun. The way you modify an object is you click and drag that object into the modifier, like that. This menu works differently. It works the opposite way, but if you're interested in those, let me know. So right now, it's actually making geometry of your text. It's actually there now because you've extruded it. If you click on the extrude, there's options for that. Right here, this is probably the main one. How thick is it going to be? It's going to be 20 centimeters. You can control that and go, all right, I want it to be thicker or thinner. So 20 is probably fine. I'm going to make mine 30 just in case. I also want a cap on the front of it. The front of the words, I want a little bit of a round. The back of the words, I don't care because I'm going to show you that it doesn't matter for this particular case. So you can see there's a caps tab. Caps, fillet cap. I would like there to be more steps, let's say 5, and a radius of 3. Kind of keep things consistent. So it adds a little bevel to it. Okay, So we need to rotate this thing a couple of ways. First, I need to rotate this thing, let's see, 90 degrees in the Y direction. So we could use our coordinate manager. And let's see if I'm doing this right. So it's H right here. We could adjust it there. So I could go 90, and it would rotate it there. Or I could use my rotation tool and hold Shift down and rotate it 90. That's another way to do it. A couple of ways. I also need to rotate it in the X axis, 90 degrees. So I'm going to hold this down and hold it 90 degrees there. What I'm hoping to do is move this thing into this area where it's kind of blank, and I want it to fill that little space up. So it's too big, so you can adjust the text if you want to and reduce the size of the text. I'm going to hold Shift down and make that text smaller. So it's going to kind of fill in this space. And we can't see it, that's okay. We'll get it there. So I just want it to kind of fill this kind of rectangle area vertically on my screen. Then I want to pull it up. If I go into my right view, you can see it's below the floor. That's why I can't see it. It's intersecting with the floor. If I pull it up like that and it rises above the floor, now we got it. My favorite place. So it's kind of intersecting with the floor. Bam, there you go. Okay, so we got a cereal box, we got cereal bowls with cereal in it, we got stools, we have text, we have lights, and we have a floor. There's one more piece of geometry that we need, and then we're done building. We need a actual plane that's the floor, that's an infinite space. This guy right here, there's floors and skies and stuff like that, backgrounds, but we're gonna just create a floor. And this object looks like it ends, but it actually doesn't. I'm gonna pull it down so it's just below the foundation, kind of like that. Now if I hit my interactive render region, the floor never ends. It's just a constant plane. So it's a really easy way to create a plane. But you can kind of get in and out of your scene if you have your interactive render region. You can see there's some nice shadows going on. Check out your lights. Check out your text. Things are looking pretty good. All right. Next, we're going to get into some color, how you add textures, materials, and then we're going to get into some lighting after that, and then finally a little bit of animation. Next, we're going to choose some materials. I'm using a website to choose some colors. Colors can be very difficult, so let's make that part really easy. Once you start, down your track of art, and you can kind of understand complementary colors and triads and monochromatic and analogous colors, and pick colors easily. Let's just make it easy on ourselves by using some tools. If you go to Generate, on coolers.co, there's a way to create color palettes easily. So you could either enter a color by a hex code or just hit the space bar, and it'll generate a color combo that may be appealing to you. So let's say I like this one. You hit export, and for our purposes now, I'm just going to hit PNG. And it's going to create an image that I can use later on. So notice I have a couple of windows open. I have a web browser, and then I have my Cinema 4D. There are two windows open, so this is just how I'm going to do it here. I need to be able to see these colors somehow on an image or whatever. You can take them from anywhere, but you got to be able to see them. Now in Cinema 4D, this section down here is for materials. So we're going to create we're going to create one material and get it right, and then we're going to duplicate it and change the color. So the way you do that is you just double click here. It creates a material. It has this basic clay gray color, and it looks like a sphere, and it has a name of matte. Not very creative. So then you double click on this, and the first thing that's popped up in my other window is I want you to name this. Let's call this color 1. Now you may have something specific like this is the, let's call this floor or whatever, but I'm not sure exactly where I'm going to apply this first. Next, there are words here and there are checks here. We want to make sure color is checked and then luminance is checked. Reflectance is by default checked, so uncheck that. Okay. Next, we're going to pick a color for both color and luminance. There's two settings here and it creates a really nice look, so just follow along. Click the word color, and you can either pick a color, there's many ways, but this is one of the most familiar ones. You can pick a color here, or you can use a little color picker, and what you do is you just take it over here and click. So I'm sampling a color from my website. You can either do the same thing on luminance, so I'm clicking the word, and clicking here and going here, or you can come to right here, it says color, I can right click and copy, and then I can right click and paste. That's another way to do it. On luminance, let's make a couple of tweaks. Bring the brightness down. Mine's about 66%. I'm also going to change the hue just a touch, so I'm going to dial this little hue meter up, maybe make it more saturated. It creates a little more depth for that color. Not necessary, but that's what I like to do. Okay, so we have one color figured out as far as color, luminance, the brightness level, and one of our colors that we picked. All right, so I'm going to duplicate that 4 times. The way I do that is I go down to my little manager here, and I'm going to hold Control or Command and click and drag, and click and drag, and click and drag, and click and drag. So now you have 4 or 5 different materials. You can just leave them named that. It kind of does it for you. Color 1, 2, 3, 4. So what you got to do is then go into these colors and change the color of each one of them. So luminance, just a little bit of repetition. Go through. And you can do that trick where I kind of created some depth if you want to. My window pops up over there, so don't mind me. Luminance. It's nice to have 4 or 5 colors at least. And you can see that I'm starting to build my library of colors. It's color number 4. Oopsie. That's pretty bright. Maybe we want to decrease the brightness of the lumen. It looks white, but... And then last one. Luminance, color. All right. So now we have our 5 colors, and I'm going to maximize my screen here. I don't need my website anymore, so maximize your Cinema 4D. What I'm going to do next is apply these colors where I think they belong. Display, I'm going to turn off lines. I don't need that for this part. So let's do one and really look at what happens when you apply a color. So I'm going to use the foundation as my first color. Let's say the foundation, I want it to be this light purple. All you do is you click and drag onto the object, and it puts a color there. A couple other things happen. Over here, the foundation now has this little box. It's called a tag, color tag. So you can click on that tag and you can edit things down here, of course. If you edit your color and change it, it will update, real time. Let's say if I change this color to blue, it's going to update. I'm just undoing Control Z. But that is basically, you're looking for, okay, there's a color tag on my object. Now that object is very simple. It's just a cube, right? There's not much to it. So let's apply colors to the simple objects. So that's going to be, maybe the text. So I'm going to use maybe this light one for my text. That one applied it to the extrude, which is fine. How about my floor? My floor maybe is also that bright color. Okay, those are simple objects. Now we're going to start getting into something a little more complex, like the bar stools. The bar stools are two objects, so how do we apply a different color to one part over the other? Because if I just drag, like, let's say this color right on top of that, it hits it, but how would I control this a little bit more? So let's go into, what is that, the left stool? You can see if you drug the color right on top of this, the top of it, it put it there. If I drag this over here, it colors the whole object. So you can decide where, how to do things. You can be very particular with those. Up to you. So I'm just going to kind of do that color combo where I have the top and the pole. Okay. What's that going to be? Maybe that's here. So bright. Maybe that's there. Nah. Now what I just did is I put one color on there and I was like, I don't like it, so I put another color on top of it. The base molding has two colors now. The one to the furthest right overwrites everything else, so just watch for how many colors you're stacking on top of each other. You can also delete them or move them around in order left to right. Whatever's the most right will be overwriting everything. Countertop, let's say here. Yeah, definitely. This color palette's pretty sweet. Okay, the bowls, maybe those are this bright color. The milk, I'm going to need to zoom in. The milk's going to be purple. Now, all of the bits inside of the bowl, I would have to color each one separately. That sounds like a nightmare. So let's color the group. Oh, that's why. I'm on the wrong one. There we go. That's what I thought. Okay, so you can color the group. So let's go to the right one. This is cereal over here, the group. I'm just going to put a material on that guy. So that was an easy way to color that. All right, saving often. Almost done coloring. All right, we got a cereal box, which should be maybe there. Maybe the flaps are different colors. And then the lights can be, whatever you choose. So coloring is kind of cool. And then make sure you press, once you got things colored, now it's time to really start seeing how this is coming together. We got a color scene now, guys. That looks pretty cool. And if you need to change things around, feel free, but please stick to basic colors and give it a look before you move on to the lighting step. Alrighty, so we should have a scene ready to go, all modeled and everything. We have text, we have primitives, and we have a floor, we have a plane, we have seats, we have a bench. We're ready to go with the modeling part. We've also talked about materials. Now we need to get into lighting, adding cameras, and then adding some animation. So basically it's the lights, camera, action portion of the program. We're also going to figure out how to export this thing, but you guys know how to do a lot of that. So lights are a whole other element to themselves, and good lighting is good lighting, and we're going to add 5 total lights. 2 of them are going to be spotlights, which are directional, and then 3 of them are going to be big lights that kind of light the scene. So we're going to do those big lights first, and lighting it can be very basic, and that's what we're going to do in the scene. We're going to add 3-point lighting. We're going to add a key light, which is your really strong light in front. We're going to add a fill light, which is kind of another light that's not as strong, but on the other side, and then a backlight, which helps create the outlines of of whatever objects you're working with. So right up here you have a light object, and there's many types. We're going to use an area light. So your scene may change a little bit as far as lighting goes, and that's not a big deal. And you have a light object right here as well. You can click and drag this object around if you want to, and it may or may not function the way you think it does. If you pull it up and out, it's going to light the scene, but we need to change a couple of things before we really get into this. First of all, I want this to point to the middle of my scene. I don't want to have to drag it around and rotate the light itself. I want it to kind of be automated. So once I get this figured out, I can add more lights, and it's really easy. Under the primitives, I want you to add a null object. I'm just going to place it right in the middle of our scene, so I can zoom out to my 4-up view and kind of see that. I actually want to maybe bring that up so it's maybe right where the cereal bowl is, or right in the middle of the cereal bowl, so that looks good. So this is going to be called target. All right. Now, what's really cool is that you can point things to any object using a target tag. We haven't added a tag really manually yet. So under Lite, right-click, Cinema 4D tags, and then there should be a target option. Looks like a little bullseye. Just like our materials, it adds a tag to this object. And now down here you have some properties of that object. Target object right here, we want that to be the target. So what you do is you just click and drag target into this little box right here, and boom, there's a target. So what happens is when you drag your light around, you can see, like in my perspective view, if I drag it around, it's pointing toward, no matter where I drag it, it's pointed toward my scene. Really handy. Okay, so that's one part. Second, let's make the light bigger and create a little more realistic lighting. So under if you click on Light, there should be tons of tabs. There's a lot of options here, but we're going to go to General, and this is one place where we're going to add. We're going to be able to control shadows and the color and the intensity of the light. So right here, intensity is at 100. I'm going to increase that to 120. Okay, my scene gets brighter. Also, I want it to cast shadows. Underneath the shadow menu right here, I want it to cast area shadows. I don't see anything happen in my screen because I don't have the render region on. So we'll get there. Under details, lots of stuff you can add here. The outer radius means really how soft this light is. So I'm going to increase that to 200. The area shape right now, you can see it's a rectangle. You know, it's just kind of a rectangle shape, and that's emitting light. I want it to be a little more realistic, so there's two things I'm going to do. I'm going to change rectangle to sphere. So it's going to look like a ball now. So it's emitting lights in all directions now. And then finally, fall off, change that to inverse square. That is the actual physical property of how light works, and the fall off is a little more accurate. I was in a different mode over here, so I was looking for something specific. I was in polygon mode, and you can see when I click that, I don't see those little tiny control handles in my light. If I go to object mode, I have these little controllers, and that's important to have. Okay, I'm going to zoom in and isolate my top view here. What I want to do is light, my fill and my key light need to be at 45-degree angles. So 45, if I think about this is the front view, if my light's pointed at my scene from the front, I need to drag my light to a 45-degree angle. So it's kind of like hitting the corner right here. All right. Then I also probably need this fall off to come in light probably towards my cereal bowl. Let's take a look. And it might be crazy bright over here. That's okay. That's because it's hitting the floor too much. But this is about the angle that you want to hit. I'm going to go into my front display, and this light should be brought up. Okay, so it should kind of be coming down like that. Okay, so let's open up. I'm going to go into my perspective view and Command R, and now we're starting to get a little more realistic lighting. So this is actually what it's doing. This light is way too bright. I just cranked it up and it's way, way too bright. There's a couple of things you can do. You can pull the light away from your scene and it will, it'll be less hot right here, but I actually like it that close. I'm just gonna reduce, I'm gonna click on light again, reduce the power. So it's at 120, maybe we dial it down to like, I don't know, 90 or something like that. So I'm trying to get rid of that hot spot. Might also bring it up. So lighting is very much about, all right, adding a light and then getting a feel for it. You can also add a color to your light. I would suggest something really subtle and something that is in your scene. So I like this pink here. I'll bring that up. So kind of a pinkish hue. Maybe just 100%. All right, you see some nice shadows being cast from the stools. Once you get that light figured out, it's already targeted, it's already ready to go. Now we're gonna duplicate that. So I'm gonna go into my top view, and you can Command or Control click and drag. And let's start naming these things. So this one should be called the key light. That's the most powerful one. And then this one's going to be the fill light. And the fill light should be at the other 45-degree angle, something like this. And it should be less powerful. Let's just crank this down to like, I don't know, 50%. What that should do is start filling in the other side of our project. So let's say 75%. You can see the other side of things are starting to fill in. My shadows are less harsh. And now I have kind of two shadows of my stool. That's looking pretty good. You could go in and tweak this forever and ever. Let's maybe bring this up to 110. I like that. The fill maybe like 85. Okay, that's better. Okay, and then next we're going to add a backlight. So the backlight creates kind of like this halo effect and creates depth. Same thing, Control, Command, click. Drag this guy around the back of the scene. Let's call this backlight. Let's get a feel for what that's doing. All right, if I bring it closer, it should start lighting up the back of the box and the back of the table, that sort of stuff. You see how that you got some lighting on the table. There's some highlights around the rim. Rendering kind of slow. Once you start adding lights, things start slowing down a bit. So be careful with how many lights you add. I think that's nice. I could spend 3 hours on lighting, so let's call it good. Next, we're going to add some spotlights to our little lights right here. So save your work. Okay, let's add some spotlights. I'm going to zoom into my top view because I want to get them positioned. All right, right here, spotlight. Okay, it's going to add a spotlight, and you can, if you zoom out, you can see there's like a cone. That's the direction of it. So don't worry about that right now. Just try to position the spotlight right in the middle of your little lamp that you made. Okay, and let's go to maybe my front view, and I want obviously it to be up about right there. And if I go into my right view, you can see that it's pointed the wrong direction. So I need to rotate it. So R, hold Shift, and 90 degrees, and it should come down like that. I can adjust a couple of other things right here. There's the width of the cone, and there's how far the light is going to travel right here. So I want it to hit the table about, and I don't want it to go much wider than the actual light itself. So something like that. And you can see if I go into my, I'm going to make sure that just going to render a little part of this. You can see that it's actually lighting the table. I'm going to make this a bit wider. so it's a little softer. And then just like any other light, you can cast shadows. Let's make sure we're casting shadows there. And you can decrease, maybe it's a little too bright, so 75%. That's a little better. Just subtle, nice and subtle. Maybe the color can change. I want it to be kind of maybe a bit of a pink, or maybe more towards light, like a light blue. That's kind of cool. So just nice and subtle. Doesn't have to be all crazy and everything. Let's see. What does it actually look like in the actual light? So if this light comes up too far, like that, it'll actually light the object, which I don't like that. Okay, so that's looking pretty interesting. Maybe something like that. Okay, once you get that one figured out, then you can command click. I'm just going to drag it right here, bring that guy over so it's inside of this other light and kind of orbit around. You can use your 4-up view, but basically now we have lit the scene. So if I Option or Alt R, give this a little pre-visualization. You know, how does it look with your lights? Do you need to move them around? Do you need to change the color? Do you want to change the intensity? But basically, this is kind of like the final look of your video. So get the lighting correct first on one light. Target it if you can, and make sure that you render this thing out in a little render window, so you can really make sure before you move on to adding a camera and animating. The next part we're going to explore is a camera. We haven't added a camera yet. Now we're in a viewport, that's what this is called, and these are all viewports, but they don't have the ability to be animated, and we want to be able to animate a view, a camera zoom or tilt or pan or something like that, some sort of camera move to add some action to your scene. So the next part is adding a camera. So let's go into perspective view, and we're going to add another object. You can see next to your light is a camera object. So let's go ahead and add a camera. You just click it, it adds a camera. Lots of options here. Again, we're not going to really mess with many of those. But you can see that your frame changed a little bit, and then you have a camera object. If you zoom out, you can see, oh, there's an actual camera right there. It's like this little outline of an actual camera. So it's treated like a primitive or a light. You can move it around, you can pan it, you can tilt it, you can rotate it. You can't scale it, but all sorts of stuff you can do there. Right next to the camera is a black target. If you click that, it turns white, and now you're in the camera. Click it again, you're out of the camera. Very important. If you don't know, you're going to mess things up. So make sure that you understand. When it's white, you're in the camera. When it's black, you're out of the camera. Click it, go in the camera, and I want you to go ahead and pan and tilt and get a scene kind of figured out, how you want it to start. This is going to be the initial state of the camera. One thing I want you to note is this horizontal line right here. This is the actual floor. And we don't want to see, you know, if I do a little quick render, and if that line is below this darkened gray area, the floor isn't going to go up to the sky. It's actually going to stop somewhere. Also, I have lights that are kind of floating here, so I don't want to see too much above that. So I'm probably going to bring my lights up there, and just make sure that that horizontal floor light is comes above that section too. So that's a decent starting place. Maybe center this, maybe rotate it. Just kind of get it, kind of fuss with it a little bit. But what you're doing right now is you're actually moving the camera. If you didn't know, you're moving the camera right now. That's the initial starting point of the camera. If you get out of your camera, you can see, okay, your camera actually moved, and it's pointed exactly where you were. So that is a great way to move the camera, is to get in there and orbit and pan and everything and then position your camera. And you can animate like that too. This is the initial state of the camera. So give it a quick save. Now I want to animate my camera. So let's go ahead. Now you got to make sure that you're at frame zero, to set your initial starting point for your camera. And you guys haven't seen any keyframes yet, but they're hidden. They're everywhere once you see them. So we'll need to set our initial state for our animation. Animation works a little differently in this program. So first, you click on camera. Second, make sure that you're at frame 0. And then you're going to go into the coordinates of your camera. Now we can do it here, or we can also open up a different view for our program. Upper right hand corner, it says standard. You can pull this list down and go to animate. And my screen's going to move over there, so I got to pull it over here for some reason. Don't know why. There we go. And it's going to change your view, and it's going to be highly dependent on the timeline, which makes sense. But things kind of move. So all the attributes are now over here. It's the same stuff, just different arrangement. So click on camera, and you're going to see these tabs over here. We want to go to the coordinates. Basically, I want to make sure that I'm going to animate the position and rotation of the camera. The scale doesn't matter. So again, making sure you're at frame 0. You can also grab this green playhead right here. Take a look. Coordinates, P is position, R is rotation. There are little circles next to all of these. If you click them, they turn red. Those are now keyframes. And once you see them, you'll see them everywhere. So you can animate all sorts of stuff in this scene. Okay, they're red. Also, you'll see some stuff happening down in your timeline. All right, so that means things are starting to become animated. Okay, click on 90, or you can bring your playhead all the way over to 90. We're going to make a 90 frame camera move. Okay, so make sure that you're in the camera mode. You're not out of it like that. You're in the camera mode. And I want you to go ahead and make sure your playhead is at 90. Go ahead and make a camera move. And I'm going to orbit this thing and pull this over so it changes maybe to something like that. All right. The next thing you have to do is lock those keyframes in. You'll notice that those dots have become amber, and maybe one of them is red because we didn't change the rotation. So you got to click them again and make them red. Red keyframes, or red dots, mean keyframes. Yellow dots mean, hey, there was a change made, but you need to click this dot to make sure it's a keyframe. If you were to, drag your playhead somewhere else, it would just wipe them out. So make sure you click those. And now if you press play, you should have an animation. And it should loop for you. Okay, so again, we're just kind of in the render version of this. If you press Option R, you'll see what a final version would look like. Now we wouldn't want to play this back like this, but that's the final look. So that's good. Okay, let's tweak this a little bit. We should be able to control the curvatures of the animation a little bit. If you twirl down camera right here, you can see there's position and rotation, and it only reveals things that are animated, kind of like Moho does. It's really nice. We want to see the curves, the handles. So right here, there's a little F curve mode. If you click that and you highlight all of your position, XY, rotation, PHB, it's going to reveal the handles of all of these animations. If I scroll up, it's going to kind of condense things down. So it works in a completely different way, but I scrolled up, I condensed them down. The handles right here, be careful with them. I'm going to select all of my keyframes on frame 0, and you have some options right here. Right now it's spline or eased for you, and which is what we want. But maybe we want this to ease in just real slightly and then make kind of a fast move and ease out. 90 frames is quite a while. So with all of these keyframes selected, if I click and drag, things get really, really horrible if I don't press Command or Control. So I want to bring those handles over maybe to, I don't know, 35 and let go of my mouse first. So that's a real slow start to this. I'm going to do the same thing with my end keyframes. Just press Command or Control and drag those out maybe to, I don't know, 55 or 50. So it's going to ease in and ease out really, really gently. And then play that back. Have a little coffee while that plays back. That's nice. Guys, we're done with animation. Save. And this whole time we've been in Cinema 4D, how do we actually make a video? If you had Cinema 4D alone, you would render it from here, but we don't. We have it through After Effects. So open up After Effects, and your image may change quite a bit based on your settings. I think I have mine set up as a final render, so yours may look kind of like possibly that, probably. What we'll need to do is access the effect of Cinema 4D and make sure this looks right before we render it. You guys know how to render, but maybe we need to tweak some things here. So the first thing you look at is under render settings, set it from software to standard final. It should look really similar to what you saw in Cinema 4D when you had your little render window open. Next, make sure the camera is set to Cinema 4D camera. If it's not, that could be a problem. And then finally, we don't want to render the whole minute long. You guys know that. So the shortcut is to select your layer, press O to get your cursor to come to the out point, and then N for the end of the render. And if you want to, you can play this back, pressing spacebar, and it'll create a RAM preview, or I can press on mine, it's Control O. It's going to take a little while. It might be worth your time though to take a look at it. Now this is going to take quite a while, so I'll pause the video, I'll put it into RAM, and we'll see what this looks like before we render it. Boys and girls, we have a RAM preview, that's what this is called, playing back in After Effects, and it looks good to me. Looks real sharp. It's ready to be rendered, and at this point you can choose, all right, well, I want to change some stuff. I'm not real happy with the shadows or the lighting or anything like that, and tweak this forever. But unfortunately, we got to turn things in. So you should know at this point how to render videos, but just I'll go through the first part of it. Make sure that you're only rendering this part of the video. So if your playhead is, or your composition area is over here, make sure you press O and to get the precise amount that you'd like to render. Next, you're going to go to File, Export, Add to Media Encoder Queue, and that should pop up the media encoder, and you should be able to take it from there because you've done it so many times. There's also a how-to in the animation folder under Files at the very bottom, PDF for you, how to render MP4s. So render it out. Little FYI, 3D takes a while to render, so you may need to let it render for an hour or more. You can let it render overnight if you need to, but hopefully it's less than an hour. But it can take quite a while to actually complete. So hopefully this was a helpful, fun lesson. You're going to create your own favorite place in your assignment. You can't use mine. You can't use cereal bowls or cereal boxes or a breakfast bar, something like that. Make your own favorite place, but use the tools and the techniques and the primitives and the lights and the camera and the text that we've created together to create your own favorite place. So good luck.